If you're looking for a collapsible vintage lens, broadly speaking, you've got two choices. You could go for a Leica version made in Germany, very fancy and very expensive. Or you could go for a former Soviet one like this one, very fancy and a lot less expensive. But which are the best and which are the best value? Well, if you want to know, stick with it and check out the video. Hey everybody, thank you for once again checking in, and we're going to look at some collapsible lenses today. So what ones have we got? Well, we've got quite a few to show you today. We have got, let's start with the Leica Elmar 50mm f3.5. Now this was recently sent to me by a viewer, very kindly sent to me, and it's a lovely little lens. I've never used an Elmar before, so it was really interesting to use one. This one was said to have a little bit of haze, and I think it does have a little bit of haze, but it doesn't have so much haze that we can't give it a jolly good testing. We've also got the Fed 10 uncoated. By the way, the Elmar is an uncoated lens, so it must be a pre-war lens, early to mid-30s sometime, although it's chrome plated and earlier versions were nickel plated, so this is probably mid to late 30s sometime. We've also got the Fed 10 coated lens. This one's in bits at the moment because I'm servicing it. We've got the Fed 10 uncoated lens, which it will be very interesting to compare to the Elmar. We've also got the, look at this, a brace of collapsibles. We've got the Industar 22 50mm f3.5, and that's a really nice little lens. That's another former Soviet one. And then finally we've got the Summitar. This is the Leica Summitar 50mm f2. So there's quite a few collapsibles for us to look at today. We'll also be looking at, let me put these collapsibles down. We'll also have a look at, now if you've been watching this channel for what I can only call a very long time, you might remember me reviewing this very useful little blower. It's the Nitecore Blower BB, and it's a filtered blowing system. And you push a button on the top here, and you can clean whatever you want with the brush and the air jet, and it's quite a powerful air jet. It's got a filter there. Well, I've now had sent to me very kindly by the people at Pergear, this, which is the Mark II version. It's now no longer called the Blower Baby, which I think can only be a good thing. It's now called the Nitecore BB2 electronic photography blower, so we'll be coming back to look at that soon. First though, back got a frog in my throat today, back to our collapsible lenses, and let's begin with the uncoated ones. Now, I was very keen to see how this Elmar would compare to this Industar, this Fed 10 lens. I bought the Fed 10 lens some years ago, and I bought it in pretty poor condition. There's a cemented doublet in there, pair of lens elements cemented together, and they'd begun to separate. The glue that had been used to glue them together had begun to separate and turn cloudy. So this lens was a real mess when I got it. I fixed it by the preposterous kill or cure expedient. It did only cost me £5, by the way, a few years back. I fixed it by the kill or cure expedient of putting the cemented doublet in a pan of boiling water for 20 minutes, which melted the glue and got those elements back together. So this one now is not in new condition, but it's in reasonably clean condition. I'm awfully sorry, I do have a what would seem to be a large number of frogs in my throat today. The Elmar lens is uncoated, and this one has haze. The viewer who sent it to me told me it had haze, but I did the usual optimistic thing of thinking, haze, schmaze, what can possibly go wrong? I'm sure there's not really any haze in there, but in fact there is quite a considerable patch of haze. It may come from delaminating, from a similar reason, you know, that cemented doublet coming apart, but I don't know. I have looked through this one. I think it's got scratches on the front element, and I think that is what's sending us awry, because the images you get from this lens are really not fantastic. This is a well-used, well-worn lens. It's uncoated, and to make things worse, it's got scratches. Well, now, an uncoated lens, the light bounces around inside the elements, inside the lens, and you get a lot of, I don't know if diffraction is the proper term for it, but you do get a lot of light leaching and bleaching from light areas of shots into darker ones. That can be a pleasing effect. It's called glow. And Leica lenses, early Leica lenses are known for it. And when they're working right, in good condition, that glow can be quite pleasing. But coupled with scratches and haze, it turns this into a lens that really doesn't make very good images at all. They're very hazy. There's a big patch that's sort of whited out in the center of every shot. And unless you really shield the lens very, very carefully like this with your hand, then everything that comes out of it is, well, pretty awful, actually. The colours are really muddy from this lens. Uncoated lenses are not the greatest for colour. They don't tend to give as vibrant colours as coated lenses, and that's just how the technology works. That's just how it is. The light isn't transmitted efficiently enough to give as high a saturation as you get from a coated lens, so they're not the best for colours. But with the extra haze, this one is flipping awful. It's similar to how this one was, this Fed one was, before I cleaned it. So it's pretty awful. I tried black and white. I thought maybe I'd have better results with black and white, but no. Still low contrast, very hazy, big patch of haze in the centre of the shot, and just everything pretty much washed out to the point that it really doesn't look good at all. I did manage to coax some reasonable looking shots out of it by really shading with my hand. So to use this lens in its current state and get anything reasonable out of it, you do need to use a big deep hood to cut out all those stray light reflections. The other way I managed to coax reasonable images out of it was to set my camera, my Sony A7, to high contrast black and white, and that whacked up the contrast enough to get something reasonable looking out of it. I did still have to shield it and put my hand in front of the, shield the lens with my hand to cut down on those stray reflections, but doing that, I managed to get some halfway decent shots out of this lens. But we can forgive it that. I've not come here to crucify this lens. It's very, very old. It's got some wear on it. We must forgive it for making subpar images. But what I can see about this lens, and what amazed me about this lens, is how sharp it is. This lens is so sharp you could cut yourself with it. And that shines through the years, how old is it now, 80 odd, 70 odd years of wear and tear that it's had, and I can see that this is a very, very high quality optic because it does have that extraordinary degree of sharpness. That sharpness is there right the way from f3.5 fully open, and it doesn't really get very much sharper as you stop it down. It doesn't really change very much. You can work that aperture ring as much as you like, but it's broadly similar at f5.6 and again broadly similar at f8. So this is a lens you can shoot wide open. Comparing it to the Fed 10 uncoated, well, the Fed is as sharp, I think. I don't think there's any difference in sharpness. When I first shot the Elmar, I thought, that Elmar looks pretty sharp. I reckon that's going to beat the Fed. But then I went back and looked at the Fed 10 images, and I was amazed to see that they are, I mean, I can't put a hair between them. You might be able to see that one is very slightly sharper than the other. I don't know. I couldn't put a hair between them. I couldn't really see a difference. So in terms of sharpness, these lenses, I would say, are optically equal to each other. Levels of contrast look about the same. The decent images I've managed to coax out of the Elmar, the contrast looks about the same as the Fed has. Blur from the Fed, I think, is actually a little bit nicer. There's not a great deal in it, but I think it is perhaps very slightly nicer. Really isn't much in it. Surprisingly, the Elmar is bigger than the Fed, and quite a bit bigger too. Let's bring them both to their, as far along the scale as they'll go. Extend them as far as they'll go. And you can see there, the Fed here is actually quite a bit smaller than the Elmar. So I have collapsed the Fed on my Sony A7. I wouldn't collapse the Elmar on my Sony A7. That's a surprise. And that does suggest to me that these are different lenses. I'd thought for many years that they were probably the same, because when the Soviet photographic industry decided to copy the Leica 2, I didn't see it made any sense but for them to copy the lens as well. But they clearly haven't. They've either come up with their own lens or they've got one from somewhere else. These are different lenses. They do have similar optical qualities and they're very similar in their performance, but the bodies would suggest they're different. As far as quality goes, the Leica is beautifully made and has only a tiniest bit of play on its focusing helix. The machining is actually a little sharper than I would have expected there. The Fed is smoother, it's nicer machined on its rim. That probably doesn't come over in vision, but certainly when you touch them, the Fed is nicer to touch, and that's surprising. As far as quality goes, I can't see anything in it, to be honest. Quality of manufacture. The Leica's a bit shinier inside. It's got a chrome thing going on there, whereas the Fed hasn't, but you never see that bit anyway. In terms of use, in terms of tactile engineering feel, I think they're pretty much equal. These lenses, I would say, are pretty much equal optically and pretty much equal mechanically, and that was a big surprise. Now, before we go any further, I'm going to look at the Industar 22 and the Summitar 50mm in a moment. But first, let's have a look at this extraordinary blower cleaner. Let's take it out of the box. The box is similar to the previous one. I like the way that it's marked and decorated. Black and yellow work quite nicely together. So it's quite quite a dramatic style. This will come with extra brushes. However, as this was quickly sent out to me, the brush that was sent to me is not in the case that it would usually be. Usually you get 3 or 4 different brushes in a special little case. I don't have that, so just pretend I do for this one. And what do we have in here? What does it say on there? Begin your new era of electronic air blowing. So there we are. And there is the actual product itself. Let's take it out of the box. And it's a very simple thing. It's got a cover on the front to stop any dirt or dust going in the front there. So that just pulls off easily. The speed control is here. So we've got, what have we got on there? So we've got lock to turn it off. We've got silent for a nice, quiet, slow airstream. And then we've got optical, which is for cleaning lenses, any optical parts that you have. That's a little quicker. And then we've also got turbo. Let's go turbo. And this is the maximum speed. And that's very quick. That's actually very quick. I think that's about 43 miles an hour or something like that, claimed exit speed on the highest settings. So that's a very efficient cleaner, and it will pretty much clear any dust, dirt, grime that you can't get to otherwise. So this has got a load of uses. Let me just show you the brush, the controls on the top there to make the brush pop out. So this one is the harder brush, and it's on a little magnetic catch, so you just pull it off. And let me get the other one. It's in the bag. So there we are. So here's the softer brush, and we just push that into the, whoop, in theory anyway. Yeah, so we just push that into the aperture. It locks in place with a magnetic lock, and we've now got our soft brush on there for any delicate parts. So we're ready to clean. And in fact, these are really useful tools, because that jet of air means that you can clean things that would be tricky otherwise to clean. Here's a camera that I've had sitting on a shelf for, I think, 2 or 3 years. It's a nice little camera, but let's give it a clean. Oh, one thing I forgot to show you. There's a filtration system. Here's the filter on the side here. These are replaceable. Push the catch down to take out the filter, if it will come out. There we are. We take out the filter, and there's the motor, the air pump inside there. There's the filter. That will stop any nasties going onto your photographic equipment or your lenses or your sensor or whatever it is that you're cleaning. Oh, now how do I get this back on? So, as I say, I've got this camera that's been sitting on a shelf for a number of years. All of it is pretty dirty, so we're going to give it all a good clean using, first of all, maximum power to get rid of stuff off the top here, all of this stray dust. And we can do the front also. The brush is nice and soft, so it doesn't damage the lenses. I wouldn't, I'd have no hesitation using that brush on any lens or any glass part. I wouldn't use it on a sensor, but I would use it on a lens. So you can see how very quickly that cleans things, and you know, all the little nooks and crannies around the controls here were all in a mess, and now they're all clean because we've got a brush and we've got an airflow as well, and because we've got that filter there, no nasties, no big particles are going to come through and damage anything for you. So this really is a great bit of kit. Got another camera here that needs cleaning. Again, it's been on a shelf for several years, and you can see that it's very dusty and in quite a mess. So it really cleans things up nicely. I don't suppose there's any dust inside it. No. Nice little camera, but not working at the moment. So, I mean, you know, it's good for cleaning all manner of things. One thing that I cleaned recently is my XT3 here. You know, you leave a camera out, especially a black camera, even for a day or two, and it gets dusty on the top. So I'll just give it a blow with this. And everything's clean. And one place I find that cameras do get particularly messy and dirty is in the eyepiece there. A lot of dust settles there and can't come out again. So just give it a little squirt from the blower and we're all clean again. And of course, it's not just cameras, it's all manner of things that can be cleaned. Where's my other thing? Computer needs a clean. This is a black computer and it really gets the dust, and I use one of these for this pretty much whenever it shows the dust, which is almost all the time. And the other thing you can do with, of course, with this blower, if you set it to the silent, which is the slowest speed, you wouldn't want to put too fast a speed on it for this use, but if you set it to the slowest speed, I think it's entirely legit to give your sensor a little blow. You wouldn't use the brush for this, obviously. You're not going to touch that sensor with anything, but just a little blow to get the dust off. Oh. A little blow to get the dust off like that is going to do a lot of good and certainly won't do any harm. And it's a lot easier than you using a mechanical blower. Plus with a mechanical blower you don't have a filter, so you don't quite know what's coming through. So a really good product, one that I use quite a bit, and one that you might consider looking at if you want a really useful cleaning, brushing, blowing device. So back to our collapsible lenses. Well, now I should have mentioned the prices of these two. You can buy a good Fed 10 for probably between, I don't know, £50 if you're really lucky, £100 more probably. For a good Elmar, you will most likely pay, I'm a bit hazy on this, but I reckon anywhere between anywhere between 200 to 250 pounds is what a good Elmar will cost you. So there's quite a significant price difference there. The Elmar is over twice the cost of the Fed in general, and I don't think, based on my tests anyway, I don't think it's quite as nice a lens. In terms of things like blur, it's equal in sharpness, but it doesn't quite have the blur. So I would say the Fed is the better one to go for here. However, if the Fed is one a little bit better than the Leica, certainly on my test anyway. Then the coated fed lens, the coated version of exactly the same lens, this same uncoated fed 10 that we were just talking about, the coated version of this lens is head and shoulders above the uncoated version. It has far, far nicer colours. In fact, this little fed 10, this coated fed 10, this one's in bits at the moment because it's all seized up, but this coated fed 10 has the nicest colours, not of any lens I've ever used, but it's certainly on par with the nicest ones I've ever used. It's certainly one of the nicest ones I've ever used for colour, and I really must get this one back into good order. It's seized up. I think somebody's used the wrong lubricants on it. It's totally seized up. The aperture mechanism's totally seized up. It's partially dismantled. I do have all the bits stored carefully. It's partially dismantled, but it's going to have to have a total strip down. But that's irrelevant to our present purposes. So colour is far, far nicer than the uncoated version, and that's perhaps not surprising. What is surprising is how nice those colours are, and as I say, they're the equal of any lens I've tested for colour. Very, very impressive performance indeed. When it comes to background blur, this lens, well, it's just beautiful. It's absolutely stunning. It seems far nicer than the uncoated version, which is a big surprise to me. I don't think there were any optical changes. There may have been a bit of a redesign, a few adjustments and alterations to the design. I don't know, but it has certainly much nicer blur, much smoother blur, much better controlled blur. The bubbles from specular highlights, that is point light sources in the background, seem that bit nicer and more playful and just more beautiful. So for my money, this coated lens is a far nicer lens than this uncoated version. The uncoated one has charm. It'll give you the pre-war look if that's what you're going for, but the coated version is by far the better lens. Prices are similar for the uncoated version, so around £50 if you're lucky, £100 more probably. The dimensions are exactly the same. I don't think there's any difference at all in dimensions, or at least there wouldn't be if I put them in the same position. Yeah, so we can see that actually the uncoated one is perhaps very slightly taller. I've got them both on the base plate there, so the uncoated one is perhaps very, very slightly taller. So if this was a contest for the smallest collapsible lens, the uncoated lens would win hands down. It's really, really tiny, but the coated one is just a millimetre or two larger. Alright, so that's the coated. Oh, I've got them wrong. Which was larger? Oh no, it's the uncoated one that's taller. So the coated one is actually slightly smaller. So sorry about that, I had them the wrong way around. The uncoated fed is just a millimetre or two bigger. So let's move on then. Let's look at our next collapsible, which is a very common collapsible. This is the Industar 22, and this is a beautiful lens. Its rendering is much more modern than the uncoated Fed 10, and it's more modern again than even the coated Fed 10, because the coated Fed 10 does preserve some of that pre-war feel, some of that old world, old school feel and charm. So the Industar 22, for my money anyway, it's a question of feel, you know, what feel the shots have, and that is subjective. But for my money, the Industar 22 has a more modern rendering. Colours are very much on a par with the coated Fed 10, although I don't think they're quite as nice in the final analysis as those from the Fed 10. Colours from the Industar are very strong, they're very saturated, they got loads of oomph and loads of depth and loads of resonance and power, but they just seem, does it make sense to say a bit more modern? They just lack that special quality that images from that coated Fed 10 have in terms of colour, though the colours are very nice. In terms of sharpness, well, it's a very, very sharp lens. This is a Tessar lens, so those are inherently sharp. Very sharp images from wide open, as all these collapsibles seem to have, whether they're former Soviet or German made. It's the tallest collapsible here, at least of these 3.5 collapsibles, so you can see it's taller than the Fed 10 by quite some significant margin. That's about what? At least 5 millimeters, probably nearer a centimeter. Let's compare it to the Leica lens. Hang on, was I doing that fairly? Were they both on the stop? Yeah, they're both on the stop. So it's significantly taller than the Fed 10. Is it taller than the Leica? Yes, it is, but only by a little bit. Now that's interesting. The Leica lens, the Elmar lens, is nearer in dimension to the Industar than it is to the Fed lens. That's quite a surprise. The Industar, however, does take the prize for being slightly the longest collapsible here today. So it's a sharp lens, it's got great colour. Blur is beautiful also. Blur is not quite unflappable, but you know, very smooth right throughout the range. It doesn't tend to show the harsh spots that some lenses can throughout their range. This one seems pretty smooth all the way. The blur is very nice, it's delightful, it's very smooth. Bubbles from point light sources show very beautifully and make a very beautiful play in the background, although I don't think it's quite as nice as the blur from our little our coated Fed 10 here. And the coated Fed 10 is coming out on top. The Industar is very, very nice, and it's within a whisker of the Fed 10's performance. It might even be a little bit sharper, but I think overall the Fed 10 takes the crown so far. And that's including the Industar, the uncoated Fed 10, and the Leica Lights f equals 5 centimeter 1 to 3.5 lens as well. The little coated Fed 10 is coming out on top of all these f3.5 collapsibles. But we do have one more collapsible to look at, and that is the mighty Summitar 50mm f2. Now this is a beautiful, beautiful thing. If you like engineering, my gosh, this lens is a treat. It's an engineer's delight. Just look how nicely that is made. I was stunned when I got this lens. Somebody sent it to me. A viewer sent it to me, and I was absolutely stunned when I got this lens, both at the kindness and at how nicely the lens is made. It's just exquisite. I can't really show you on here how nice it's made. There is no play whatsoever in that focusing mechanism. It's totally free of play. The collapsible section moves with such smoothness, and it locks into place with such smoothness. The aperture ring turns really, really smoothly. It's got a beautifully engineered feel. So as far as engineering goes, this lens is just exquisite. In terms of size, it's obviously going to be quite a bit bigger than the smaller collapsibles. That's the difference that f2 and f3.5 make. This is an f2 lens. This is how much bigger it has to be than an f3.5 lens, which can be tiny. It's really quite a significant size difference. The Summitar is about a third as long again as this Fed 10. Now, this is an f2 lens, and you may not be surprised to learn that it's actually not as sharp as the f3.5 collapsibles fully open. It is reasonably sharp, and it's entirely sharp enough, and I certainly wouldn't call it a soft lens, but wide open, it's just not as sharp as the smaller collapsibles. So if you're into sharpness, if sharpness is important to you, you will need to stop this lens down to, I would suggest, somewhere around f3.5 before you start getting the kind of sharpness that you get out of the little Elmar and the Feds and the Industars. So not a, not the sharpest lens I've ever shot wide open, but certainly not the softest. When I got this lens, I tested it against a Jupiter 8 because that seemed the most likely, the most comparable lens. That's a 50mm f2 rangefinder lens, and I found this one, the Summitar, was very slightly sharper, although there really wasn't much in it. And it was a case of, yeah, the Jupiter on the whole looks very slightly softer, I think. There really wasn't much in it, and it was difficult to tell, but I think the Jupiter was a bit softer, but not the sharpest lens in the world shot wide open. Colours are beautiful. It's got warmish colours. Colours from the Jupiter were much cooler than they were from this lens, so this has nice warm colours. It's a little bit like the difference between Kodak Gold and the old Fuji C200, that slight difference where the Kodak was that little bit warmer and the Fuji was just that little bit on the cool side. This is just a slightly warmer lens than the Jupiter is. I do love this lens. I've used it a lot, and it works particularly nicely on my Sony A7. I've not used it a great deal on film. I don't shoot a lot of film these days, but I have used it loads digitally, and it's a lovely piece of kit. But it's actually easier to take out the little coated Fed 10 because, that is a much lighter lens. It's a much more portable lens, and I'm willing to sacrifice those couple of stops that this has over this one. I'm willing to sacrifice those because this is just a lighter package. Now, in terms of which makes the nicest image out of this whole bunch of lenses, let's just do a little bit of improvising. So there we are. There are our collapsible lenses. We've got the Summitar here, we've got the Elmar here, we've got the uncoated Fed 10 here, and I've forgotten one. We've got the coated Fed 10 standing right in front of it. Stand up, you cheeky fella. It's decided it's going to collapse, and it's hard to uncollapse with one hand. There we are. You stand there. And we've got the Industar 22 here on this side. Well, now which lens is the best out of this lot? Well, that is, as always, quite a difficult question. There's a range of prices. A good Summitar will cost you about £300. A good Elmar will cost you about £200 to £250. A good coated or uncoated Fed 10 will cost you between £50 and £100, and a good Industar 22, which gives a slightly more modern rendering, will again cost between £50 to £100. Now, which one would I pick out of this lot? Well, there are various factors to consider. They all have similar image quality. So having said that, I think the best bargain here is this, the coated Fed 10. That is a beautiful, beautiful little lens. It's got fantastic colour, it's got very beautiful blur, it's very sharp, okay. It doesn't open up any wider than f3.5, but that's okay. How wide do we really need to go? This is the lens I would pick if I was on a budget. If I wasn't on a budget, I would most likely pick this lens, the Summitar, and if I wanted to get that bit more sharpness out of it, I'd just stop it down. But who isn't on a budget these days? If you're not, you're very, very lucky. I would recommend my best buy, my star buy out of these collapsibles, including the Leicas and the Feds and the Industars, is the coated Fed 10. It's a beautiful, beautiful lens. It has fantastic blur, it has fantastic sharpness. It's very cheap, or at least it's relatively cheap, and it's very small as well. So I think of the collapsibles we've looked at today, this is the one you should get. A very, very, very nice lens indeed. But if you want to get any of the others, you won't go wrong with those either. Well, now, I guess that's it from me for today. Many thanks for watching. Please don't forget to do all the usual YouTubey things like liking, subscribing, and ringing of bells. Many, many thanks go to our subscribers. Thanks for your support. It really means a lot. If you like this channel, please chuck us a sub. That would mean a lot, and it all helps the channel to grow, develop, and progress. Many, many thanks go to patrons, without whom this channel couldn't do what it does. So many, many thanks to you, patrons old, patrons new, anybody who's joined us and left, anybody who's joined and stayed the course. Equally thanks to all. So I guess that's it from me for now. If you enjoy the content on this channel, maybe you'd like to become a patron too. You can do that over at patreon.com/Zenography, and you can do it for as little as one of your Earth dollars per month. But from me, that's it for now. Please do join me next time, if you're not busy, for a spot more Zenography. Hope to see you then. Cheerio.